Well, I grew up pretty much in Nashville, Tennessee. I was born in Texas, but we moved to Nashville really quickly. We were not a church-going family, but this was Nashville, Tennessee. So culture-wise, Jesus was everywhere, and being gay was not acceptable at all. And I suffered a lot of bullying, and I was terrified of coming out gay. When I did finally come out gay the first time, I have two coming out stories. Don't recommend it.
How old were you the first time?
I was 19, and I came out, or I was forced out. My mother found out some evidence that I was gay, and I was forced out. But I was beat up, violently assaulted, police coming out and everything, and it was just a very...
Guys picked from school, or was this in school or outside, or neighbors? Who was doing this?
Well, I was at a party after I had gotten kicked out of my house for being gay, and at the party, these two people, these two men, attacked me, and they got the best of me, and some lesbians came to my defense, thank God, and the police showed up, took their word for it, laughed at me as I'm bleeding in the snow, and walked away.
Wow. And it was definitely a homophobic attack.
Definitely. They told the cops that I had been hitting on them, which was the furthest thing from the truth. And the cops basically, as they laughed at me walking by, said I deserved it.
Wow. So that probably led to even reinforcing shame and that.
Right. Reinforcing shame that I don't know that I would have realized it at the time, but it instilled a sense that there's something wrong with me, that people would react this way and treat me this way, even though they were wrong and I knew they were wrong. This was back in the, close to mid to late 80s. It was a different world back then. You didn't live out loud and proud in Nashville, Tennessee at that time.
And so your first coming out, how did that go? Were you going to clubs? Describe your experience during the first coming out process. How old were you again?
I was 19.
19, okay. Talk about the first time.
Well, the first time that I was out of the closet, I was basically forced out by my parents. And the moment that they found out, I was kicked out of the house. I was homeless for about 3 weeks. And I tell people all the time, just because you come out doesn't mean you're a healthy person. And I was not a healthy person. I had been abused up to that point. I had turned to substance abuse to numb the pain. I got involved in a very wild kind of party scene. And so when I got kicked out, I just kind of went full into that world. And it was just make enough money waiting tables during the day to go party at night. And so for a few years, it was pretty blurry.
Did that impact your view of LGBT life?
It did, and it became the basis for what would be exploited in my religious experience. I became a Christian, and of course becoming a Christian, and I do believe I had a true experience because I'm still a Christian, but I was involved in a very conservative part. I had moved to Texas and quickly went into the church closet. I call it the stained glass closet. But because of my experience, instead of me taking personal responsibility, it was because I was gay. It wasn't just because I was a dysfunctional person who didn't know how to do anything differently and had turned to those things in a dysfunctional way. It was because being gay is bad. And it was easy to scapegoat my bad experiences as reasons for why you should change. Instead of just dealing with the fact that I was a troubled gay teen who needed help.
What was the experience being homeless as a gay teen? Because that's such a problem we still have today.
Mm-hmm. Being thrown out of the house for being gay was one of the most traumatic experiences I've ever had in my life. The one woman who I thought was who I have a good relationship with today, but who I thought was my pillar, was telling me that I had a special place to burn in hell, that God hated me, that God had sent AIDS to kill fags. And to have a parent say that to you is bad enough, but then to turn around and say, you're disowned, dismissed, get out of the house, you have an hour. And I lived in my car for 3 weeks, and it was horrible. I was suicidal, and there was a drag queen at the time, Carmela Marcela Garcia, girl, and now she goes by Mela, who told me to get my ass over to her condo immediately. And I always say that God used a drag queen to save my life.
Were you surprised by your mom's reaction?
I was, my mom's reaction was surprising. I knew that she didn't appreciate homosexuals or homosexuality, but she had lesbian friends that she had worked with. But I guess when it came home, when it was standing right in front of her, what she had been taught in conservative Christianity in rural Tennessee came flooding forward. And so you can't ever say that toxic theology just dissipates, because all of what she had learned as a kid had come flooding out that night. And that toxic theology taught her that it was okay for a mother to turn out her son.
Was she concerned about you?
At the time, she tried to roll things back. She had all these rules, and if I would go to a doctor and get tested for AIDS and didn't, do this, that, or the other, and I was so mad. I was like, so I'd rather live in my car than with you.
So how did you end up in Texas now? How did you go from going back in the closet to some extent to getting going full back in the closet? Talk about the process.
Right. Well, I moved from Tennessee to Texas in October. I remember the date, October 18th, 1989. My aunt, who was a church-going woman, sent me a one-way ticket on Greyhound, and I got on it, had $35 in 2 suitcases, and I was drunk as a skunk from the night before. And I knew that my life was out of control. I was doing ecstasy and all kinds of stuff all the time. And I knew I needed a change of scenery or I was going to die. And so I went to Texas, found out that the drugs were better there than in Tennessee, and quickly spiraled down to the bottom. I joined a 12-step program at the time, and they were very cool. I was glad I was there at that time in my life, but they all started becoming Christians. And Michael, Amira, Sherry, they just were amazing, and they were real. And but then they all started becoming Christians, and I became a Christian.
And they were all gay?
No, well, Michael was, and my sponsor Paul was. But they were all gay affirming, but then everybody started becoming Christians and viewpoints started changing. And I felt like I had become part of a real family at that point. So I don't know that they ever pressured me to become a Christian, but I felt a lot of pressure to do that, just to keep up with my new family. And I did become a Christian, and this was in Texas, very conservative part, and I look back and I wish I'd run down the street to the biggest gay church in the world, but I went a different path and went down the conservative route.
Talk about the early experiences with that.
Well, at the time, I kind of had this view of all Christians as being blue-haired, Bible-thumping, pew-jumping weirdos. And I went to this church that wasn't that at all. And they were actually cool, and it was full of artists, and their worship time was gorgeous. They had beautiful harmonies, and I was just all like, oh my gosh, I don't feel out of place at all.
What church is this?
It was Grace Vineyard of Arlington, Texas. But they were home to an Exodus group. And so they were very cool, but then they're like, oh yeah, we love gay people. We have a special group for them on 7 o'clock on Thursday nights. And I was like, what kind of group? And I had met an ex-gay person in Nashville before, and I thought he was full of crap because I'd seen him out at the bars and stuff. I was like, is this one of those ex-gay groups? And they go, well, some people call it that. And I was just like, I don't want to go to that. And they're like, just give it a shot. I'm like, I'll go to see what it's like. Because I was expecting manipulation and all this other stuff that you experience in a lot of other groups. And when I went there, this guy was like, I was like, first of all, I'm not playing football. And he said, I won't make you play football. I can't make you do anything. I said, and are you going to do electroshock therapy? He said, that is something I would never do, and I would report anybody who did it. He gave me answers that I wasn't expecting, and he was handsome. And I was like, this guy can't be too neurotic or weird. And I went, and he was like, you know what, Randy, we don't need you to come to this group. And I was like, aren't you supposed to be threatening me with hell or something? And he was like, if you don't want to come to this group, you don't have to come to the group. I'm glad you're coming to church. Good for you. So it was on the Exodus end of things, it was a very liberal group at the time. I think that's changed.
What was the name of that group?
Living Hope.
Oh, that was Living Hope.
Yeah.
Okay, that was Living Hope.
Well before the years of Ricky Gillette.
Who was running it at the time?
Scott Music.
Mm-hmm. And
Scott Music was running Living Hope at the time. Could you see that?
Scott Music was running Living Hope at that time.
And so you started to find it different than you thought it was going to be, and were you buying into the idea that you can change at the time?
Not at that time. You know, I thought I would go to watch just to kind of for the spectacle of it. And I'm not exaggerating at all. I wanted to go because I was that kind of person. I just was like, this is going to be the weirdest thing. I can't wait to be there. And I showed up and it wasn't weird. And the first teaching I'll never forget was about emotional dependency, not even about homosexuality. It was a peripheral issue. And it changed my life. And they were talking about, you know, emotional, and instead of it just being about helping me not be a codependent or emotionally dependent person, that was supposed to somehow help me not be gay. They made that argument. Instead of it just being, here, stop being codependent or emotionally dependent, it was a step toward not being gay anymore. So I was always tied into, you're emotionally dependent and codependent because you're gay, instead of you're just being a human being who struggles with these things. But because that first meeting on that topic was so impactful for me, I kept going back.
Mm-hmm. And how far into this did you start identifying when you first put on that label, I have changed or I'm ex-gay? How long did it take?
It did not take long after I joined Living Hope to kind of put on the identity of being a former homosexual. Again, up to that point, I had not known what it meant to be a healthy homosexual. And here I was surrounded by these people who were not afraid to say that they had same-sex attractions. And it was, again, another way that I finally felt community. I was finally invested. I was finally being embraced, or I thought, for who I was. It was the first time I had experienced those types of things. And so it was very, had a very, I don't know, I don't want to say cathartic. What's the word I'm looking for? The false sense of community and acceptance that I experienced there was the first time I'd ever really felt accepted, even though I didn't know what real acceptance would be like. But it was the first time that I felt any kind of connection with a group of people that was long-lasting.
So it gave you something you desperately needed, but there were some cruel strings that were hidden.
Correct. Yeah. I now look at it as a hook, using legitimate needs to pull you in and keep you there. And with the idea that you can be free, but you're always on the hook. There's always an issue that you have to deal with that never actually resolves your sexuality. But they hook you in with the legitimate feelings and legitimate issues.
Were you still going out to gay establishments at this point?
I wasn't. I've always been, this is what I believe kind of thing, and I always live what I believe. And so when I started going to that group, I was, when I committed, which was really quickly, within a few weeks, I never went out to the gay bars again.
Were you missing that? Were you missing the sex, the excitement? It's a big thing to suddenly give up.
Oh yeah, I missed it greatly. But I liked being sober, and I liked not having to worry about how I was going to get home, or it was it was I missed it greatly, but it was such a different way to live that it was exciting at first. To not be a part of that. I did miss the sex though.
And well, that's a big thing, though. I mean, how do you deal with, in your prime of your sex life, really giving that up while your other friends or people you knew were going out and engaging in it? There were options. It wasn't, you were always a half hour away from going to being in a situation where that could occur.
Right.
How did you deal with that, the frustration?
Oh yeah. Well, in ex-gay world, it's even a sin to masturbate, but I was very good at it. So that's how I compensated at the time. And I just never was accountable for it at that time. Sorry, that's just the truth.
How did you go from a participant to somebody as you gradually got into leadership? How did that occur?
Well, it was interesting because at Living Hope, I started feeling accepted. And for the first time in my life, I started feeling comfortable talking. Like in my household, I went to counseling for this later. I was never allowed to talk. I was never asked my opinion. I never gave voice to anything. And then when I came out, the only time I would open up was when I was very high. And so being in this group, I felt like I could start talking and sharing, and I found my voice, believe it or not. And I shared my story, and people were, crying. They were talking about how impactful it was and all this other stuff. And I was like, I can actually encourage, inspire, and help people. And of course, because in order to be an ex-gay poster person, you have to be a good storyteller. And I was apparently a good storyteller, so leadership picked up on that, and they started asking me to respond to letters we would get in the mail or lead a small group when a leader was out, and then I eventually led the small group. And Living Hope was going to close in '95, and I wish I had led it, but I led a coup of leaders to compel the board to keep the ministry open.
Why were they going to close?
Because Scott was moving. At that time in 1995, Living Hope was going to close because Scott Music was leaving. He was moving back to Virginia. But they kept it open because we lobbied them to do so.
You said a drag queen saved your life, and you had friends that you must have gone out with and get high and go out to the bars in Tennessee. How did they feel about this?
Well, the Tennessee party crowd faded away very quickly once I moved to Dallas. But the Dallas party crowd was very angry. I can remember one of my friends. He had been raised in a religious environment, and he disowned me immediately. He was like, "We are not talking again," and we never did. And I regret that now. But they were not pleased, and they had very not positive things to say when I joined Living Hope Ministries.
How did you react to this?
I thought that they were being unreasonable. I didn't know any history of living in a religious. I mean, I had my experience with my parents, but I was not raised in the church. So I didn't realize the amount of abuse that they had experienced at the hands of religion until later. And so now I know why, but at the time, I know why they reacted so badly to me. Is now not them reacting badly, it's them reacting justly, the way that for what they experienced. One of my character strengths and weaknesses is when I buy into something, I'm there, and I'm a zealot about it. And I don't know that I gave them the opportunity to try to convince me not to do it. I think like the one person who was like, "This is it, we're not talking anymore," he didn't try, but a couple other friends were like, "Do you know what you're getting involved in?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but apparently I didn't. I wish I'd listened to him.
When was the first time you went public with your story and became, I guess, a spokesperson?
Oh, well, at Living Hope, after I'd been a leader, a small group leader for a while, I started filling in for teaching, really had a love for that, enjoyed teaching, that type of thing. I would get invited to speak at regional conferences, sharing my story. Then I started doing workshops, and eventually that just led to interviews in the local media in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we got involved with online initiatives that brought gay activists together and ex-gays like myself together, and we started dialoguing, and that's how I met Alan. And then when Alan became the president of Exodus, he said that I was the first person he wanted on staff, and so he invited me to be on staff, and I moved to Orlando in 2002. And then that's when things went national. So,
What was it like being a national spokesperson for the ex-gay industry?
being a national spokesperson, looking back on it, was traumatic. And at first, I thought it was fun. I thought it was exciting. But then looking back on it now, I know why I would get migraines before any TV interview. And if it wasn't friendly media, Christian, I would always get migraines. And I think it's because in my heart of hearts, I knew that what I was saying, it didn't matter how eloquently I could put it across or what story I could tell, it wasn't true. I believed what I was saying at the time, but I think in my heart of hearts, it was just a very traumatizing thing.
Well, if you believed it on one hand, but didn't know it was true on another, as a cognitive dissonance, talk about that and help people understand this.
In the ex-gay world, cognitive dissonance is an everyday way of life. And you're taught how to respond to the dissonance with words of faith. Like, I struggle, but this is my cross to bear. This is my thorn in my side. This is what all honest Christians have to put up with. And so even though you know that in your heart, you know that it's not working, that you're not changing, there's an excuse for it. There's still something you have to work on. There's still something you need to press through to the Spirit on. There's still counseling you need to go through. And so every time that voice of, this is BS, right? You had answers to stuff it down and say, that's the voice of Satan. This is not truth. This is not biblical, And so every time reality would say, but this is true. You're not changing. That gay kid in the 80s was dysfunctional and unhealthy. That's reality. That's what you should focus on. No. I've got a church-affirming family. I've got the national stage. I've got workshops. I'm telling all these things. I know that change is possible because I keep talking about it. But in reality, there was always that dissonance, but there was always these religious excuses to numb the pain.
At any point during this journey, did you believe you were heterosexual or headed in that direction?
There were times when I thought that I was changing. I dated a lovely lady back in 2006, and I was genuinely attracted to her. I think that I do believe I subscribe to the theory that there is a spectrum of sexuality, and somewhere in mine is this really small sliver of bisexuality. However, I had nothing to compare that to. And now, I can say, even though I was genuinely attracted to her, emotionally, intimately, sexually, it is nothing like what I feel toward my fiance, Dan. It never prevented me from having crushes on the guys at the gym. Even though what I felt towards her was legitimate, it wasn't what I as a gay man need. And so, but I grasped onto that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually changing. but it never grew. It never stopped the crushes on the guys. It never changed my affinity for the LGBT community. I was always felt bad that I was not a part of that community. Even though that was undermining the world, it was another cognitive dissonance for me. But I desperately held on to that, thinking that I was changing, but it was just a part of who I am.
Did you talk about this openly with the woman you were going out with?
Yeah, she was a former lesbian. It was that whole stereotype.
Uh-huh. And did she have issues too from her side?
Well, I say she was a former lesbian. I should amend that. She's bisexual. And so, yeah, she's beautiful. She was beautiful. We made a cute couple. It was very well celebrated in the ex-gay world.
Mm-hmm. And why did it end, if that's not too personal?
Right. It ended with my relationship with that lady in 2006 ended just because we just realized that we weren't compatible. And I think we never gave voice to the fact that she's still bi and I'm still gay, but we knew that that something wasn't there that should be there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But that happens with a lot of couples. Some of them end up getting divorced.
Right.
John and Ann Paul come to mind, but there are many others. You must have seen that within the ministries, that dynamic.
Correct. And that was one thing that we were concerned about, I was concerned about, is like, do we really want to go down the marriage path? Because we dated for a little over a year. And are we sure that we would survive the long haul? And we weren't, so.
And other people, though, in Exodus would do that, but then it wouldn't work a lot.
Right.
You were involved politically as well. Talk about the push to pass laws. You were sort of the point person for that. You would go up to Washington and lobby. And what was that like, that experience?
Well, all my life I've been a public policy geek. I was in youth and government in high school for all 4 years. I've always loved, my favorite class was civics class. I keep up with politics. It's not very much fun to keep up with politics lately, but I really enjoyed our government and how it works and all that other stuff. And I've had that my whole life. So joining Exodus, and it was kind of a rush. You know, I shared my story with Chuck Colson's co-author for The Good Life. My story is in that I no longer agree with. And it was just a rush to have these high-profile people wanting us to join them in their public policy pushes. And so we were a part of the Arlington Group. I'm not supposed to say that, but I'm going to. We were part of the Arlington Group and another group called the DC Group. And, you know, we went up to Capitol Hill. We went to DC at least once every other month, sometimes more, and lobby for the federal marriage amendment at the time, which I deeply regret. There's video out there that I can't even watch of myself at that time. I'm about to get married to a dude. And I feel guilty. You know, it's like, do I deserve this? I fought so hard against it. It's very hard sometimes to think through that. But don't worry, honey, I'll marry you.
What was the reception on Capitol Hill from lawmakers?
When it came to the leaders on Capitol Hill and their response to us, it was always on the DL. It's like, oh, the ex-gays are coming. They can be useful, but let's be careful. You know, that type of thing.
What were they concerned about?
They were concerned about us going out and being gay again, and because that had happened a lot. But I'll give an example. I went and met with Rick Santorum in his office, and I gave this big emotional testimony of my story and thanked him for his righteous stand for this, that, and the other. And for a senator to walk over, put his hand on my shoulder and say, I'm so glad you're here, you know, was powerful. It was addictive. It was like, here I am, you know, in a senator's office, and he just told me that I was powerful. And I shared my story actually in the Senate building on Capitol Hill, and there were 3 senators there, and they're all clapping, standing ovation. It was very narcotic. That was the word I was looking for.
And I started my organization when George W. Bush invited Exodus to the White House. What happened there?
When President Bush invited us to the White House, I'll never forget it. I was 20 feet away from the president, sitting next to Alan, who was sitting next to Bubba Cathy, who was sitting next to Dr. Dobson, and it just felt like this is what we're supposed to be doing. And now I look back on it, and I'm like, how dysfunctional, how awful is this? This is systemic bigotry and stigma in action at the highest level, and at the time I was involved in it. And it's very hard to look back on that. You know, at the time I was so proud. I was, Mama, I'm going to the White House. Da, da, da. And she's like, you know, and I show up to the White House, and now I look back on it and I'm like, why didn't you yell out? Why did you betray your community like that? And it's a hard thing to think about, but I'm glad that the blinders have been ripped off, and I now, of course, support full marriage equality, and I'm going to marry a dude next year.
What was the point of the White House? So they were trying to pass the federal marriage amendment. Did they discuss, we're going to capitalize on your stories, we need you to tell your story to pass this so George W. Bush can get reelected? Mm-hmm. What was the strategy behind us? Take us there.
I think the strategy behind having us as a part of the Arlington Group, as well as at the White House for the meeting, was to help build up legitimacy for us as people who have changed, to prove that change happens, and that you shouldn't redefine heterosexual marriage in their view of redefining marriage, to include homosexuals because of systemic stigma and bigotry. But they felt like we gave legitimacy to their arguments on a relational and personal level. So they didn't see us as the think tank, culture vulture warriors. They thought of us as the personal stories that would give them legitimacy on that level.
One article I remember that pissed me off was the ad, was the hate crime ad, that our lives were worth more as homosexuals and former homosexuals. So you were lobbying against hate crimes.
Yeah. Which is awful, because I was a victim of hate crime. One of the ads that we were involved in was lobbying against hate crimes, and it was with the conservative argument that to pass hate crimes would make homosexuals somehow more valuable than anybody else who experienced violent crimes. And myself, and actually the woman that I started dating was in there, Janet Boynes, and another gentleman were in there. And looking back on it, it was another one of those moments where I just don't know how I was ever that person. It was horrible. I mean, I was a victim of a violent crime. And it's another one of those moments of, why did you betray your community like that?
Who came up with that ad?
The ad, I think, was inspired by the Arlington Group. And we were a part of the Arlington Group as well as the DC Group. The Arlington Group was Tony Perkins, James Dobson, Falwell, Ted Haggard before he fell. And they would come up with the big ideas of raising hundreds of thousands of dollars to put these ads in papers. And I think that was born out of that group.
What was the DC Group?
The DC Group, unlike the Arlington Group, the DC Group was like the fringe players. Like the Arlington Group would be like, we appreciate what you're doing over there. And they were the people like Peter LaBarbera and folks like that. Now the person who ran the DC Group, Vicky and Phil Burris, they were members of the Arlington Group, but they ran the DC Group. And the DC Group was, I think, Robert Knight, Peter LaBarbera, Matt Barber, those folks, the ones who are really out there.
Was there a big difference in the...
Oh gosh, yes. The Arlington Group, they were much more professional. That's where I met Kellyanne Conway. And when I say professional, they had their stuff together. they were true analysts, and they were able to come up with some amazing plans. And if you want to know about a monolithic agenda, it would come out of that room. And I'm sure it survived under a different name somewhere. But like the DC group, that's the first time I ever got in a fight with some of those folks, because they literally would have an agenda item on, we need to talk about how to re-stigmatize male homosexuality. And even I, as an ex-gay person, got in a fight. I'm like, I'm not talking about that. But that's what that kind of group would focus on and talk about.
Kellyanne Conway, what was your experience with her?
When I met Kellyanne Conway, of course, it was long before she was ever the liar on TV that she is now. She came across as very personable, very smart. She is an incredibly intelligent person. I don't know what happened to short circuit that, but she just, I have no doubt that the reason why Pence was on the ticket was because of her and the Arlington Group.
How anti-gay is she?
I never had a lot of personal conversations with her, but she was very supportive of us at Exodus.
Mm-hmm. And did you hear her say anything that was shockingly anti-gay? Or
her role at the Arlington Group was really Kellyanne Conway's role at the Arlington Group was more of an analyst. She would bring all the polls in, and she would discuss what keywords were effective and what weren't, and how to. She kind of helped craft the strategies for how to approach the public with our viewpoints and those type of things. So I only heard her as a analytical think tank kind of person, not personal beliefs.
did she come up with some of these related to ex-gay terms? Did she come up with polling or words to help to push this narrative?
I would imagine when it came to Kellyanne Conway's role at the Arlington Group, she was turned to with seeking her advice and counsel on how to push public policy initiatives, which I'm sure included federal marriage amendment, hate crimes type of things. So.
And was Kellyanne Conway supportive in her role at the Arlington Group of ex-gay programs?
Kellyanne Conway was a member of the Arlington Group, and everyone who was a part of the Arlington Group had to approve of every member who joined. And so she had to have been supportive of our efforts, or she wouldn't have allowed us to be a part of the group.
And she's tied to Pence as well, and her role with Pence.
Right. Well, the Arlington Group loved Mike Pence, and I think that's the reason why they sold out to Trump so quickly, because he put him on the ticket. Because I know from my experience with the Arlington Group, they would never sign on to Trump unless they believed in a long-term goal of Mike Pence being eventually president. That's my opinion.
Do you have any experience with Pence at any point?
I met with his office a couple of times, and they were all very supportive. We knew that he was a big supporter of what we were doing.
And what about Mike Pence?
Mike Pence was the darling of the Arlington Group, and the reason why he was is because he fully subscribed to all of their beliefs in public policy ideas, including the anti-gay initiatives.
There's debate about his views. Now he's trying to back away from conversion therapy and ex-gay ministries. What are his real views from your experience?
From my experience, I've learned that Mike Pence may be trying to say what he needs to say to get what he wants to accomplish in the moment. But the truth is he's an anti-gay vice president, that if he will use the power that he has to continue to disenfranchise LGBTQ people. And if he's ever president, you think the nightmare we have now will be even worse.
And he supports, in your view, though, what is his view from your experience about ex-gay programs specifically and conversion therapy?
Given my experience with the Arlington Group, it leads me to believe that Mike Pence is very supportive of ex-gay ministry, and he supports the efforts to try to convert people from gay to straight.
What was the first time that you remember questioning whether you should be in that role as a spokesperson for Exodus International and pushing these political items?
I think it started turning when I would get migraines. Like I did migraines in front of the 2020. I did an interview with 2020 that was never aired. I got migraines after talking to her. I got a migraine when I was standing up with several of the Arlington Group members pushing for the federal marriage amendment. I'm in this horrid gold jacket, and my physical health was getting worse and worse and worse. And then, like at the Arlington Group, with the 2008 election coming up, I mentioned that we should be watching Barack Obama and was laughed at. And I was like, these folks just don't get it. And
Why didn't they think they should be watching Barack Obama? They didn't get a chance to win?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, he's the only one saying what everybody wants to hear, and they were just like, one of my friends was like, I'm glad you offered your opinion, and they chuckled. They was like, we don't have to worry about him. I was like, okay. And then I came home and I was like, I don't think we fit in there anymore. It's obvious they're myopic in what they focus on. And that was the first little, this is not our home. They're using us to amplify their voice instead of giving us a platform for our voice. And I think I know Alan was feeling the same way. And so we got out of politics shortly after that.
How did they react to you leaving politics at the Arlington Group?
I think the Arlington Group's reaction to us withdrawing from politics was, I don't know that they weren't like upset with us, but they were disappointed. But I don't think they really missed us that much because all their initiatives, all their wedge issues had already been dealt with.
What was your next step in your evolution? How did it progress?
I think the next step in my personal journey out of ex-gay world was the Lisa Ling interviews and the reactions by the old guard at Exodus. It became very eye-opening, especially around 2011, that these people that I had defended, protected, promoted, looked out for, worshipped at some point, they turned on a dime and were just incredibly hateful to Alan. And it just was shocking to us both. And I was like, how can, these are supposed to be people of the Spirit. They're supposed to be our friends. You say something that apparently you've always said, but for some reason, now they just turned on you like that and said, that doesn't make sense. And I was looking at all these long-term success stories, and I didn't see any fruit of the Spirit. And I was like, is that what I want to be? And so it really kind of knocked some sense into me of, if this is what long-term ex-gay world does to you, I don't want any part of that. And so that really was an eye-opener of how the groupthink, punishing you for challenging the groupthink or even questioning the groupthink, would become so punishing. I was like, there's something wrong here. And that's where my journey out of the ex-gay world started.
And how difficult was that? Were you coming to terms with an entire change of heart, change of mindset? Mm-hmm. It was probably jarring, to say the least, maybe traumatic.
There's a program about Scientology by Leah Remini, and she often says in that program where it's a very difficult day when you realize that everything you've believed in was a lie. And I had many of those days where it was ongoing revelation of, how the hell did I get here? How the hell did I ever think that these folks had my best interest at heart? How did I ever become one of those folks? And it was very difficult. And there were many nights where I cried myself to sleep on the couch. Many nights where I was afraid that I was going to lose my job, which I eventually fired myself for. But it was unbelievably difficult. And I'm not trying to generate sympathy. I'm a grown man. I put myself in that position. but it was unbelievably difficult because people were so mean, and you had nowhere else to go. At the time, I didn't feel like I could go to the gay community, so I felt very alone, very isolated, and hurt.
Somebody had to acknowledge first that there was a shift in views. Who was it? Was it you or Alan? I mean, somebody had to break the ice because probably he was afraid to tell you, and maybe you were concerned how he would react, especially as being your boss.
Right.
So how did that actually, the first crack when someone said, hey, I'm not sure I'm buying all of this?
Right. Well, I think it was after the Lisa Ling interview. My unofficial title was the official fire putter outer. And so I would get all the calls about, why is Alan doing this and saying this and all this other stuff. And I realized, and when I went to him, I'm like, you stuck your foot in your mouth. Because at the time, he was more down the road than I was. I said, you stuck your foot in your mouth. You're going to have to backtrack. You're going to have to say something. And he said, no. And that's when I knew that there was a huge shift coming, because it was the first time we didn't allow the old guard, or Alan didn't allow, and I caught on eventually, the old guard to bully him into backtracking or saying something different.
The old guard, the Andy Comiskys of the world, seem pretty extreme. For those who, it seems that the ones long-term who claim change are of that cloth.
Well, I think that they hold on to those things because it's the only thing that they know, and they're deathly afraid of all of their worst fears, the stigmas that they've bought into, the bigotry that they've bought into coming true. They believe absolutely that if they go back to being gay, that they will slide into drugs and orgies and all kinds of hedonistic, licentious things. They don't believe in the reality that you can be a healthy gay person. They believe that being gay is dysfunctional and unhealthy, and that it will end with them in a very bad way.
How do you get through to remaining ex-gay activists? Not them per se, but how do you get through to many of these activists that may be having some doubts now? What would you say to them?
When I look at a lot of the folks in the Freedom March and some of the folks in the Revoice movement, I see that innocence and that desire to know truth. And I would say to those folks, you can be a healthy LGBT plus individual. That God loves you, and going down this path, this ex-gay path, whether it's hardcore, old guard ex-gay or ex-gay light, like in the Revoice, you are a valued treasure on every level for who you are as an LGBTQ person. You can be a happy, healthy, whole person. You can have the true identity that God created you to have as an LGBTQ person. You can have the love of your life be someone of the same sex. It can be done, and it is possible. And I would encourage the people of faith in those movements, look for the fruit of the Spirit. You will not find any real evidence of it in the ex-gay world. You'll see a lot of words, you'll see a lot of grins, you'll see a lot of pats on the back, you'll even be put on a stage. But the fruit of the Spirit is not evident in that world. It is evident all over the LGBTQ world.
HIV and AIDS. It was used as a scare tactic to get people into the movement. And it seemed almost like it fit together for a while, or you have, this is your judgment. See, we told you it was bad. This is your judgment. Just discuss the role of HIV and AIDS in persuading people to enter Exodus or North or whatever ex-gay program it may be.
When it comes to HIV AIDS, as someone who was out the first time in the 80s, I've lost a boyfriend to AIDS. I lost friends to AIDS. I remember what the Pose and all the gay shows now talk about, that we would lose people every weekend. There would be 2 or 3 people gone from the bars every weekend. And I'll never forget, as a 17-year-old, watching Jerry Falwell on TV talking about how God sent AIDS to kill gay people as a consequence for their sin. And so I never subscribed to that personally. I would always speak against it, even in my Exodus days. That was not God's condemnation. However, that was so ingrained in our culture that so many people would enter these ex-gay programs with the fear that God was going to strike them down. If it wasn't with AIDS, it was going to be with cancer. That if you didn't live a righteous life outside of your gay identity, that you would somehow be struck down by God. And that was a tremendous fear for people who had only known a God of wrath. And so I know there were a lot of people involved in the ex-gay world, and I spent a lot of time talking to people in the ex-gay world who were only in there because they thought God would kill them because they were LGBTQ.
What your advice to somebody who's thinking of entering would be?
Go for it.
If you're watching this video and you are someone who really struggles with who you are as an LGBTQ person, or you're a parent of someone who is LGBTQ plus, and you're considering going into ex-gay world or the ex-gay ministries and the conversion therapy, I would just encourage you to run, to go the complete opposite direction. Don't get involved in these ministries. Their sexuality, their identity is not going to change. Now, you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can interpret the Bible however you want to interpret. But those organizations are only going to make a difficult situation worse. And they'll do so with grins. They'll do so with pats on the back while they take your check. But it's not going to change who you are or who your family member or loved one is. And again, you can believe whatever you want to believe. That's your prerogative. But as a person who was a part of the ex-gay world for 23 years, who was a person in the upper echelons of leadership, you cannot change who you are as an LGBTQ person. You have to come to terms with that. And I would end by saying, it is a lie to say that you cannot be a happy, healthy, whole, and faithful LGBTQ person. I am a gay man. It took me a long time, 23 years, to come to terms with that. But I'm also a believer, and I'm engaged to another man, and I'm living my full truth today. And it is happy, it is healthy, it is whole. You can find that for yourself as well. And while all these other accusing voices are trying to convince you to do this, that, or the other, in your heart of hearts, embrace who you are. And that's where your freedom is, not in what other people tell you it has to be.
What would you like to tell those people who are upset? Some people are upset we're doing these interviews.
Right.
What would you like to say to them?
To the people who are harmed by the toxic theology and stigmatizing views that I once proposed and promoted, that made you feel alienated or disenfranchised from not only public policy but your own family, I'm very sorry. And if you're angry and you can't forgive me, I get it. I'm angry and I can't forgive myself for some things. I'm not trying to convince you to like me, but I do hope that you'll accept my sincere apology. And now that I know better, I'm going to do better. And I know that will only go so far with some folks, because I did a lot of really bad stuff. And I know that. And I'm trying to make amends for that. And so while you may not be able to like me or forgive me, completely understand that. But hopefully you'll see that I am working for our community again. I know I betrayed our community, but now I'm back home, and I've found my way home, and I'm glad to be here.
Federal legislation to ban conversion therapy for minors is going to be introduced. Do you support that?
I completely support federal efforts to ban conversion therapy for minors. It has been proven in localities all across this country, up to the state level, that conversion therapy is harmful and damaging to young people. There are hours and hours and hours and hours of testimony at every level of our country explaining why this should happen. And so it's time for our federal government to get on board with what's happening all across this country and start protecting our young people, our most vulnerable people. LGBTQ kids need us to be the leaders that we're supposed to be, and we need to pass conversion therapy ban on the federal level. We deserve protection, that LGBTQ kids should be protected, and that this ban against conversion therapy is the right thing to do. Kellyanne Conway and Vice President Pence know that conversion therapy doesn't work. One of the poster boys, John Polk, is now an out gay man who just enjoyed his pride parade with his partner. They watched Alan Chambers shut down Exodus because of 37 years of abuse that it has perpetrated across our country. They've watched me come out as a gay man, and now I'm getting married to a gay dude. So they know that conversion therapy doesn't work, that ex-gay ministry, every major leader that they've ever worked with is now out and gay. So they know that this doesn't work, and they need to stick up for our LGBTQ youth as an act of repentance for their past bigotry.